project we did to teach people to have better interactions with chatbots. My apologies for not being there in person, but I seem to have caught a stomach bug and I wasn't up to coming down to do this in person. So big thanks to Casey for running the video for you. And also big thanks to my collaborators at IBM, Mohit, Narendra, Jain, and Ingrid. So as motivation for this project, we're seeing chatbots everywhere across a wide variety of domains and industries. There's chatbots in finance and healthcare, retail, and even chatbots that provide legal advice. And at IBM, we have the Watson Assistant platform, which you can use to go and create your own chatbot. And as part of our work, we kind of dug into some of the logs of these chatbots to understand the kinds of interactions that people were having. And we found that in some cases it's not perfect. So this is a real example of things that we saw in those logs, although we have changed all of the details. And in this case, we're seeing the user say, "Good morning, my name is Samuel and I applied for the baggage inspector position last month, and I haven't heard anything yet." And what does the bot do? The bot kind of throws up its hands and says, "I'm sorry, I don't know how to answer your question." So this example is tough for a couple of reasons. One is there's some amount of context that the bot wasn't necessarily capable of processing. So my name is Samuel and I applied for the baggage inspector position. And the other difficult thing is the way that the intent is expressed. I haven't heard anything yet. So to human beings, we would look at this and understand that this person is asking about the status of their job application, but for whoever created this bot, they didn't really anticipate someone asking this question in quite this way, and so this utterance just doesn't match an intent in the bot's dialogue tree, and the bot throws up its hands and says, "I'm sorry, I don't know how to help you." So the question we try to ask in our project is, can we teach people how to have better interactions with chatbots, and can we do it by having them interact with a chatbot? So can we use a chatbot to kind of train people to have better interactions? And there were a couple of lessons that we wanted to teach people. So the first one is that chatbots best understand simple, plain language with a minimum amount of context. And this is directly motivated from that first example I showed. The second lesson is about conversational breakdowns, and some of these breakdowns occur when a chatbot fails to understand a person's intent, like the example I just spoke about. But also there's a set of breakdowns that kind of happen across a conversation, across multiple turns in the conversation. And this is based on some work from our colleagues in another lab. And they also did an analysis of chat logs from Watson Assistant and found a couple different signals of when conversations were breaking down across multiple utterances. These were things like similar repeated utterances when someone tries to tweak what they're saying to get the chatbot to respond in the way that they want. Some of these are asking for a human agent, so explicitly asking for a human is a pretty strong signal that the chatbot isn't providing the information that's being sought. Things like when the chatbot says, "I don't know," or "I don't understand," it's pretty clear that chatbot's not able to provide help. And also, some users were very creative in how they expressed negative sentiment and their frustrations interacting with chatbots. And so the third lesson we wanted to teach is about recovery from these breakdowns. And this is work that we did that's going to be appearing in Kai in a couple months. So just as a quick preview, chatbots do have a couple strategies that they can use to recover when a breakdown happens. These are things like showing options when it's not quite sure which intent you meant to trigger, asking the user to rephrase, asking the user to confirm that some intent is really the one that the user wanted, and also deferring to the human. So if a chatbot can't quite figure out what you want, it can always defer to a human agent to get your question answered. So what we did is we created this online experience. This was renamed to Be the Bot after we submitted our paper. And this is a public-facing website, so you can go and check it out and interact with our chatbots. Although please don't do that right this second. Please do that in about 10 minutes when this talk is over. And I'm going to put the URL up at the end, so you don't need to remember it right now. And so in this experience, we have participants go through 2 conversations. The first one is in the banking domain, and you as the player in this conversation, you are acting as a chatbot. And you have to help Nikita, who's a customer, get a question answered. And this question, it's very long, it has a lot of context in it, and it ultimately boils down to how to send money to a friend. But since the lesson we're trying to teach is about asking simple questions with a minimum amount of context, we kind of start with a very long question, and then players have to kind of get Nikita to simplify her question in order to answer it. The other thing that we do in this conversation is we use some gibberish words to kind of demonstrate how a chatbot might interpret context that it hasn't really been programmed to interpret. So for a human being to look at these gibberish words, it really doesn't make sense. And so one of the strategies is to kind of ask the bot to, or ask Nikita to define what these words mean, but that's never really helpful by design. This chatbot, we use fixed responses, so we force you to say one of 3 things. One thing you can try is to take a guess at how to answer her question, and that's always wrong. One I just mentioned is about asking her to define one of these context words, but it's never really helpful. Because the correct strategy that we're trying to steer people towards is to ask her to simplify her question. And in our user testing, we found that asking people to simplify twice was kind of the right number, and so when you do that, then it unlocks the right answer to answer Nikita's question. The second conversation is in the domain of shopping, and in this one, you, the player, are a customer, and you have to interact with Blue, who's a shopping chatbot, and you have to do a couple different tasks. You have to check if an item is in stock, you have to check if a coupon code is valid, and you have to track a shipment. And in this conversation, we use a mix of free response and fixed response options. The fixed response options force certain kinds of conversational breakdowns to occur, and then the free response is sort of letting you dig yourself out of those breakdowns to get the information that you seek. And the other thing we do in this conversation is we have this egregious classifier at the top. And what this is doing is kind of tracking those conversational breakdowns that happen across multiple turns. Again, this was things like similar repeated utterances or negative sentiment language. So this gives it a little bit more of a difficulty to succeed in this conversation. So to evaluate this experience, we kind of threw it up on Mechanical Turk, and we had 88 people go through both conversations and fill out all of our surveys. Our sample did skew a little bit towards females and towards younger people, but most importantly, we made sure that English was the primary language for all of our participants because this is a language task. Most of our participants had experience using a voice assistant, so about 80%, but a little less than half had experience using a chatbot before. So these were very much chatbot novices. The experience lasted about 15 to 20 minutes. Some people were a bit faster. And they got the 2 conversations in a random order to prevent against order effects. So for this talk, I'm going to focus on 2 of our outcome measures, what people learned and how they felt towards our chatbots. But if you read the paper, we have a lot more detail on how people enjoyed this task. They did. How successful they were interacting with these chatbots, what the interaction patterns were, and we conclude with some design recommendations around chatbots, things like highlighting context and using perceived helpfulness as kind of a knob to impart feelings of empathy for chatbots. So overall learning outcomes. We asked participants if they felt like they learned something from this experience. Overwhelmingly, they did. So congratulations to us, it's party time. But let's kind of dig into the 3 lessons that I talked about earlier. So Using simple language, most participants, 83%, correctly identified that the optimal strategy in the banking scenario was to simplify, ask Nikita to simplify her question. And when we look at the qualitative results, we see people basically parroting this back to us. I learned that it's ideal to ask simple, to-the-point questions. I learned that sharing too much information can just confuse a chatbot, and to get the best out of a chatbot, it needs to be provided with simple sentences. So this is great. They really picked up on this lesson from the conversation. So the second lesson around breakdowns and egregiousness, there were 6 different ways in the shopping conversation that it could have broken down or become egregious. People did not have perfect recall, but most people, 70%, were able to recall at least 3 of these different types of breakdowns. And a little more than half recalled 4 of them. So again, they are learning about these things. I learned more about how chatbots work and what causes them problems. I learned that there was an algorithm to detect when a conversation with a bot is not doing well. And again, that's based on the work of Sandbank that I talked about earlier. And the final lesson on recovery, so all participants had at least 3 different kind of recoveries that they experienced in the shopping conversation. One was the bot asked a clarifying question when it sort of partially understood something that you uttered. One is we forced an utterance to trigger the wrong intent and then required you to rephrase. And one is the bot gave options when it was unsure of which intent to trigger. And again, in their own words, participants are recognizing these strategies. I learned a few different strategies that bots can use to prevent bad conversations. I learned the process that chatbots use to decipher information they don't understand. And if you ask the bot a question in a different way, sometimes it can better understand your needs. So finally, just a quick note about how people felt towards our chatbots. In a lot of human-robot interaction studies, we see that participants develop feelings of empathy towards the robots they interact with. That was the same in our study, that they reported having feelings of empathy for our 2 chatbots. But more interestingly is almost 3/4 expressed a strong desire to interact with chatbots in the future. And remember that for the most part, our participants were novices with chatbots. Many of them hadn't interacted with chatbots before, but after doing the experience, they were left with a positive impression of them. This participant said, "I've had great experiences with chatbots so far and would love to use them as they become more and more improved and as we learn how to speak to them." But in some cases, we do see that some people prefer to talk to humans. The bot has a long way to go in order to be useful. I think I'd rather just deal with a human and bypass the bot. So that's kind of a consistent finding across our participants, that some number of them still prefer to talk to human beings. This is perhaps my favorite quote from the study. This participant said, "I suppose it's sort of 50-50. So yes, chatbots need perfecting and we need to improve chatbot technology, but humans also need to learn to speak chatbot." So with that, I will defer back to Casey for questions, since she was aware of what we were doing in this project. Hopefully she can answer all your questions. And again, I apologize for not being there in person, but thank you so much for listening to my talk.
Thanks, Justin.
Are there any questions?
So I'm a little bit confused about the purpose of the study, because it seems like what this study shows is by having people act out the chatbot, you can teach them the limitations of the chatbot. But I don't think we're going to start running training programs for people on how to interact with chatbot, right? What chatbots or other agents, what any agent needs to do is to train people in real time as you're talking to them and you have no idea who's talking to you, try to get them to move in the direction that you can understand, which is kind of like what people do in conversation as well, this whole coordination thing. So I'm trying to find what are the lessons for actual interactions from this study.
Yeah, so, and again, I watched Michelle's talk this morning, and I think a lot of the talks here talk about how chatbots can be more empathetic, but I think my team was really interested in coming at it from the other angle of how could we teach humans, and if you do teach humans to empathize with chatbots, what effects do that have? I think there have been some other studies in that vein of research. And a few things I would say, I'm not sure if your point about if we wouldn't necessarily train humans. I mean, there could be an introductory chatbot experience when you come into a chatbot experience that does various things to try to have the human build empathy with a chatbot. So that was part of what we were trying to explore here, especially in the banking conversation. It really did try to put the human in the perspective of the chatbot and simulate a lot of the breakdowns that happen. Like when I showed this at the NeurIPS conference, and there were a lot of international speakers in attendance, and they saw the gibberish words that the human was saying to the chatbot, and you as the chatbot had to determine your response. They really didn't understand those words, and they thought it was because their lack of understanding of English. And it was really fascinating to watch the strategies they would use, and then they really did understand how hard it was to be a chatbot that wasn't trained on those kinds of words. So I don't know, I'm torn. I think we did show some interesting findings around if you do build this empathy later on, they have more successful conversations, there's more interesting things. So I don't know, maybe some chatbot experiences need an introduction to chatbot interaction.
I think
Michelle.
you ask a very valid question. I was also kind of like puzzled a little bit by the purpose of the study. On the one hand, I think some of studies we did before, it says, we want the chatbot to be transparent per se, right? So it's almost like you walk into the restaurant, you never tell your waiters, the waitress to say, give me blah, blah, blah. So waiters or waitress always show you the menu, right? So you can choose from, which means it is you don't put them in a situation, you can order something, the kitchen will never going to make it for you, right? So this is from a transparent view. I think that's a good purpose to show the users what the limitations of a chatbot. I think it will be a good one. I guess another side I didn't quite get it is, I thought if you want to fulfill that purpose, that maybe it's nice to took the step further for the study. It is what people would do. So in this case, it is you would learn from this interaction to use the data to train chatbot to be better. Because in this case, chatbot will know that, humans will do this way, but I don't understand it. So we use that like Shimei is not here either. Shimei has a really nice paper in IUI, I think 206 or 7, about two-way adaptation. Which means that is if they don't understand the human said, and they will teach them what I would understand from one way. Another way around it is you eventually, because I don't like the idea is we want to train people to adapt to chatbot. That's not our purpose, right? The purpose it is you want the chatbot to be transparent to further the conversation, as this gentleman mentioned earlier. So I guess I didn't see that part of it. So is there any future work plan to do that?
Well, so let's see. Two responses. I think Justin put his favorite quote, that it's a 50-50 and a lot of human-human interactions, right? We don't rely on the waiter or waitress to do everything for us. We really do try to meet them halfway. If it's their first day, if they're new to the restaurant, and I'm not new to the restaurant, we might do different things. So I think we're seeing it as, and this I understand is a controversial viewpoint, that we're trying to meet the chatbot 50-50 with the human. Michelle, to your other point about using the way people interact with this chatbot to improve chatbots, we are doing that, and that's what I wanted to mention about. If you go to IBM Research AI and look for Learn and Play, we have 4 of these games deployed that show off some of the latest AI research. We're using them as active platforms to do our HCI research to then improve the AI algorithms underneath it. So as Justin said, you can go to bethebot.mybluemix.net, and we are using some of that data to then train and improve these systems.
Let's thank the speakers, because we are in coffee break time already, so you can continue the discussion.